Good evening and a warm welcome to yet another biography event. My name is Kai Bird and I'm the director of the Leon Levy Center for Biography, a wholly unique institution by the Graduate Center and founded by Shelby White and the Leon Levy Foundation in the year 2007. I want to thank Shelby for her steadfast support for the Biography Center. It is her vision that makes this program possible. As some of you may know, last year, Shelby White gave $10 million to our endowment fund, plus another $5 million in matching grants. So if any of you care to drop $1 million on us, the Leon Levy would match it with another $1 million. And we'd name one of the 4 fellowships after you. Seriously. You may think this is a joke, but actually, about a month ago, I got a phone call from a donor who will remain anonymous so far, offering just that, $1 million. Kai, I want to give you $1 million. I was floored. But he is a fan of biography, and so it's possible. Anyway, that's my pitch for the day. Please note that our next event will be on Wednesday, November 19th, when we will celebrate Nicholas Boggs for his biography of James Baldwin. He will be in conversation with New York Times columnist John McWhorter. We're very proud of Boggs because he was a former fellow here at the Leon Levy Center, and he's just brought out this massive new biography of James Baldwin that has been reviewed everywhere. So anyway, please mark your calendars and register for this and our other events on the Leon Levy website. And if you've not done so, please register your email address on our handsome new website so that you can be notified of future events. But tonight I'm delighted to be here this evening to introduce my friend and fellow biographer, Amanda Vaill, the author of Pride and Pleasure, the Schuyler Sisters. She will be in conversation with another old friend, Megan Marshall. Amanda Vaill is the author of Hotel Florida, Somewhere, and the best-selling Everybody Was So Young, a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award. She is an Emmy-nominated screenwriter, and her journalism and criticism have appeared in the New York Times Book Review, the Washington Post, Town and Country, and New York. A past fellow of the Guggenheim Memorial Foundation, NYU's Center for Ballet and the Arts, and the Coleman Center for Scholars and Writers at the New York Public Library. She lives in New York City. Megan Marshall is the author of Afterlives, On Biography and the Mysteries of the Human Heart, a collection of retrospective essays on the biographer's craft, and 3 biographies, the Pulitzer Prize-winning Margaret Fuller, A New American Life, Elizabeth Bishop, A Miracle for Breakfast, and the Peabody Sisters, 3 women who ignited American Romanticism, a Pulitzer Prize finalist. Marshall is the Charles Wesley Emerson College Professor Emerita at Emerson College, where she taught life writing and archival research in the MFA Creative Writing Program. Amanda and Megan will be in conversation for about 40 minutes, and then we'll take questions from our in-person audience. This session is being live streamed. When you get to the Q&A session, wait for the microphone so that your question can be heard on Zoom. At the end of the evening, Amanda Vaill will be signing books out in the lobby. Again, thanks to the Leon Levy Foundation for funding this and all our events. I now turn over the conversation to Megan Marshall. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai, for that very kind introduction, and Thad for running things in the background. And Amanda, I'm so honored to be able to talk with you. Your first biography, Everybody Was So Young, was very formative for me when I was writing the Peabody Sisters, and I think we have a yen towards writing about groups of people. So anyway, I think of you as a mentor. So here I am, getting to ask you questions. My first question is, when did you know that the Schuyler sisters would be your subject for this book? And did it have anything to do with a certain musical, or should we not even mention that?
Yes and no. I've always been attracted, as Megan knows, to what I guess I would call hinge moments in history when tectonic plates are shifting. And I wrote about American modernists in Europe and America. I wrote about the mid-century theater and performing arts world in this country that at a time when America was really stepping up to the plate as a leader in world culture. I wrote about the late 1930s in Europe when fascism and communism were struggling to take over. And the ultimate founding, the ultimate hinge moment, the foundational hinge moment for our country really was the American Revolution. And I have always been interested in it, in part for that reason. And I had read Ron Chernow's biography of Alexander Hamilton and thought to myself, why has nobody written or thought to write about the two women at the edges of his life? They seem so interesting. At the time I was writing Hotel Florida, however, and I just could not imagine writing another book so different. I was, when you're writing something, you don't think of that. So I finished it. I tried to think of what to write next, and I went to see a show at the Public Theater. And the last week that it was there, a musical by a young man who I'd actually been familiar with since he was in the jazz chorus at Hunter High School with my daughter. So, I had been following this kid's career, and I thought, oh, this should be interesting, rap musical about Hamilton. And lo and behold, here were these two women, and I suddenly thought, they really do stand up. They have appeal. There is something here. It's not on the stage, and it wasn't in Chernow's book, but it's somewhere, and I want to write about it.
Great. Well, and you deliver on that need for something to be there about them. So another big decision after you decided to write the book was the way you structured the book, many portions of it in the present tense. And I wondered how you came to that decision, and maybe you could read a little passage to give people a sense of how that works.
Okay, I'll try. The book begins, the prologue is Hamilton's deathbed, and it is a scene that is known, I think, to anybody who knows history or knows his biography. But what I was struck by in writing it and in reading about it is that both his wife and his sister-in-law, her sister, the glamorous Angelica, with whom he had a very special kind of relationship, both of these women were pushed to the side, in part because women were not supposed to be in the foreground of events as momentous as the death of a statesman like him. But I wanted to put them back in the middle. I wanted to restore these women to their rightful place. And in order to do that, I felt like I had to flip the telescope that we look at history through, and see the things that normally seem up close, further back, the things that we see farther back, up close. I would tell this story in two narratives, and one would be the story that people are mostly familiar with from patriarchal history, if I may use that term. But that would be in the past, because it is, in a sense, a settled matter. We know what these things are. But the women's narrative, the narrative of the women's experience, would be in the present, in part because it brings it up closer. It makes it as if they are living it in front of you. And I also wanted, in doing this, not just to restore the women to the center of the story, but to put the men back into the women's narrative, into the relationships and households that they really were a part of, so that they're part of a world that women made as much as the women are part of the world that men made. And one of the benefits of doing these two narratives, it occurred to me as I wrote, is that occasionally you come across experiences that are seen in one way historically, but are felt in a different way by the women going through them. They don't possess all the knowledge that we have. And in telling the two stories in these two different narratives, one is able to provide a kind of suspense, maybe, or commentary on the history that we know. The passage that I thought I might read, it's very short.
Please do. Don't just think you might.
I will read. And which I printed out so I don't have to squint at it and I don't have to take my glasses off, occurs when, at the point in the book, when Hamilton has accepted Aaron Burr's challenge to a duel. And this happened in the aftermath of the gubernatorial election of 1804, which took place in April. And during the course of the campaign, Hamilton was heard to utter comments about Burr in private that seemed exceptionable, and Burr challenged him for them, and Hamilton could see no way to avoid accepting the challenge and fighting him, as it turned out, being fatally wounded and dying. We know, I tell the story first of the whole run-up to the duel from Hamilton's point of view, from the point of view of all the historical knowledge that we have.
At the very beginning of the book.
And that's his death at the very beginning.
Okay.
But in the actual,
leading up to this section,
about page 300 and something.
Right.
We read all about how Hamilton got to the point where he was standing on the shore waiting for the boat to take him across the river to Weehawken, where he's going to get shot. And then I jump back to recount the history or the story of that summer, which seems a very golden and wonderful time to Eliza, and to tell the story of their private life and what that looks like. And of course, as you get closer and closer to the moment of the duel, you know that he's going to go off and die, but she doesn't. And so this is what I wrote.
That's Eliza Schuyler Hamilton.
Yeah. So Elizabeth Schuyler Hamilton is waiting for, she's been, well, we will join her right here. In the coming days, Hamilton's gaiety continues, as if he had some wonderful secret he can't share. He stays overnight in the city a number of times, probably because he has cases coming up at Circuit Supreme Court session on July 6th. And on July 4th, at Francis Tavern, he presides over the annual Independence Day dinner of the Society of the Cincinnati, the Revolutionary War Officers' Fraternal Organization he's been President General of since Washington's death. "Who do you think was there?" he asks Eliza, as he describes the festivities afterward. And when she can't possibly guess, he tells her it was John Trumbull, the portrait painter and history painter, who's been absent in England for almost 2 years. He intends to move to Boston and has landed in New York just in time for the Cincinnati Gala. What would she think of having him to dinner on Saturday, perhaps with a few people he particularly likes? Say, William Short, who before he was minister to Holland and then Spain, used to be Jefferson's chargé d'affaires in Paris, and William Stephen Smith, a Cincinnati member who was part of the American legation in London in the 80s, and his wife, John Adams' daughter, Abigail. What an odd assemblage. A protege of Jefferson's, 2, if you count Trumbull, and Adams' daughter and son-in-law? Adams was not a big fan of Hamilton, I want to just interject here. Is her husband uncharacteristically trying to build bridges to his adversaries? And to what purpose? To underline the fact that this is a family meal in the country, as Hamilton put it to Short, Eliza gives her guests a simple repast and takes the leaves out of the table so they could sit near one another. Trumbull, his raven hair gone prematurely silver, could tell her all about the Cincinnati dinner, how Hamilton was prevailed upon to sing lustily an old camp song from General Wolfe's campaign against Quebec back in the French War, and how Aaron Burr sat silent, gloomy, and sour while glasses were raised and healths were drunk. Talk moves into politics, and the secession movement that Hamilton is afraid Burr wants to encourage. Turning to Trumbull, he says, "You're going to Boston," to a meeting of the possible secessionists. "You'll see the principal men there. Tell them from me, as my request, to cease these conversations about a separation from the Union. It must hang together as long as it can be made to." When they rise from the table, it's still light, and the Hamiltons take their guests out into the garden. Smith, admiring the woods, supposes them to be full of game birds. "So they are," agrees Hamilton, but he won't shoot them any longer. "I will protect them as long as I live," he says. When they return to the house, Trumbull spies Hamilton's fowling piece in the hall. What will he do with it if he won't kill any more birds? "Why, give it to you," says Hamilton, handing the gun to Trumbull. "He won't be needing it anymore."
Great. Thank you so much. So, Amanda, you were diving into this history that you had not, I assume, studied in depth before. You were going from the Spanish Civil War to our revolution. How did you go about it, mastering all of this?
Well, it took me 9 years to write this book, shall I say. So first of all, it gave me a lot of time to do things. I read, and 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 I read. I read biographies, and I read history, and I read interesting, weird kinds of history. There was a couple of wonderful women's historians, Lydia Kerber and Mary Beth Norton. I read books that they had written. I read Joseph Ellis. I just read everybody. And I read a lot of old newspaper articles and pamphlets and other stuff, to kind of fill in what these lives were like. But really what I did was to dive into the correspondence of all of these people, their diaries where they existed. There are a couple of diarists whose work I used. One of them, Gouverneur Morris, who was like one of the great diarists, and actually, he was one of my absolutely favorite minor characters in this book. He's not even a minor, he's a major character. Yeah. He sort of threads through. But, so I read all of that sort of stuff. I just read an awful lot. And then I started sort of trying to cobble it together into something. And I did this at the Common, when I was at Common. I began trying to outline the book. I didn't start writing it because I couldn't actually quite do that yet, but I did start to try to make a narrative out of what there was.
So you give a wonderful sense in the book of the contingency of pretty much every historical event that we now know took place and you were able to write about in the past, but still it's all up for grabs, and Hamilton is trying to have things turn out the way he'd like, and everybody else is trying to have it turn out the way they'd like. And I'm just wondering, you said that you were drawn to this period because it was one of upheaval and uncertainty and definitional. Did you find it was even more so as you got into it? Were you surprised by
one of the things
the flux?
that stunned me was how weirdly like our own period this was. And there were political sex scandals. This is what actually ended Hamilton's political career, largely, was a scandal that he got involved in. There was horrible political polarization and name-calling and just mudslinging in the press, such as, we don't see anything even, online we do, I would say. Yeah. There's, the kind of trolling and just horrifying stuff going on. That happened back then. so you see all, this period was so full of turmoil. And it, yeah, yes.
Makes a good read, I'll say. The honor culture, if that's the term for it, of dueling, which you explain the different steps of the duel and how you whatever, you threaten somebody, you know all these terms. Do you think that we're still living with that in a way, this honor culture?
That's
and
a
that
really-
people can't, some people at any rate can't, just give up or
That is
concede?
a really interesting idea, because I guess, it has gotten to seem weak to just say, oh, well, let it go. People just need to push it. They can just keep pushing it. And, in the 18th century, there was an actual code duello, as you pointed out, that had steps that you went through in order to satisfy yourself and the public that your honor was intact if somebody had insulted you. And indeed, this is why Hamilton fights Burr. It's because Burr says, I've been insulted, and Hamilton believes that if he does not meet the challenge, that he will be thought a coward, he will be thought dishonorable. And of course, for him, as an outsider, which he really was, I mean, this is a man who was an illegitimate, penniless guy from the West Indies, who suddenly, he becomes Washington's Treasury Secretary, the first Treasury Secretary of the United States. This is a position of such responsibility and probity, and should have gone, it's a real insider's job. And he feels always, I think, this need to prove that he is as good as all the other guys in the room.
Well, we know where that goes. And it has something in common with the mafia, I think, and with people who grew up or relying on mafia lawyers and that sort of thing. So now here's a question. I don't know this period well at all. Aaron Burr is kind of a villain in this story. Do you think are you fair to Aaron Burr?
Well, I think I'm fair to Aaron Burr, but that's what I think. Actually, Burr is, except that he's so much smart. I mean, Hamilton was always maybe the smartest man in the room, but Burr would have run him a close second, always. And Thomas Jefferson was right up there. And I think the three of them were they were the three smartest guys. And otherwise, I would say that Burr reminds me an awful lot of Donald Trump. He is a man with, Hamilton said he had no principles, and I think he's absolutely right. This is a guy who, would change his coat depending on how it would serve him. And he formed a company to bring fresh water to New York City, which had suffered from many epidemics because of, purportedly, people thought, because of bad water. So he founded what was going to be a public-private partnership, and they would get funds from the city. I mean, this is so late now, you can't believe this didn't happen last year. He founded this company, and Hamilton thought this was a great idea because Hamilton was very into public health. He had funded a street washing machine for Philadelphia when he was a resident there. So he was very, very invested in this, literally. And his own brother-in-law became a board member of this nascent company, the Manhattan Company. At the very last minute, Burr, who was a very clever legal draftsman, inserted a teeny-weeny little clause in the charter for this company that allowed him to use the assets, to put the assets of the company into a bank that he, as a board member, could draw on for his campaign funds, for paying his gambling debts, for doing whatever else. I wonder if we've heard of anybody who does anything like that.
All right. So you're fair to Burr.
Yes.
He was a villain.
I think I'm fair to
He was
Burr.
a villain. So coming from New England, well, I didn't grow up in New England, but writing about New Englanders, I was stunned to see this book that's really just all about New York State and New York City, and this is the revolution that was supposed to like start up there in
Where's
New England.
Boston?
But it must have been fun to write a New York story for you. Did you enjoy that?
Oh, it was very fun. It was very, and you know, as a child, my father's family have, and I still actually own this property, a farm in western New York State, which they built in 1817. They bought the land from the Holland Land Company, which Philip Schuyler was a board member of. And we would drive up there to see my family that still lived there when I was a child and go all through all this landscape that I write about in this book. And so in a weird way, this was like homecoming for me to do that.
Well, I think the reader senses that. It just is alive with affection for your home state. So we could go see the graves of Angelica and Eliza in the Trinity Churchyard downtown. Are there any buildings that feature in the book that are still standing?
Francis Tavern is still there.
Where is that?
And that is down near the Battery.
Okay.
Also, Castle Clinton, which is a round structure near the Battery, it is actually on the Battery, in Battery Park. The Battery's been extended because there's been all this landfill, but that was built in the War of 1812 as a fort, and when the War of 1812 was over, it was turned into something called Castle Garden, which was a big recreational area for New Yorkers. And in 1825, when the Marquis de Lafayette came to New York, came to America for a farewell tour throughout the entire country as a sort of gesture of.
He went to Boston twice.
Yes, he definitely did. He went everywhere. He went out west. He went to Kansas, for God's sake. I mean, he really went everywhere. And they had a gigantic ball for him at Castle Garden that Eliza went to kind of as his date, because of course both of them were widowed by then, and they're sitting on this dais in this huge pleasure garden that's been made over into a kind of, fairyland of twinkling lights and portraits of people, and there's a spotlight, there's a copy of this bust of Hamilton sitting right there, like in between the two of them, which is kind of cute. I love that idea, that there they are with their old friend all together
So that
again.
place is somewhat.
And that's still there.
That's
You
still
can go
there.
down there.
You can go there.
And
Even
also
I could go there.
Hamilton Grange, Hamilton's house, where this dinner party that I was writing about is still here. It's up by City College, and you can go and visit it at any time.
Is it a public?
It's owned by the Park Service, and it is lovely. You can go and look at it.
Okay.
Absolutely beautiful.
So you are really great at describing the clothes and furnishings and that sort of thing. Was that fun for you? Was that
Oh, it was fabulous.
And
one
the
of
letters were full of that, I guess.
Well, not just the letters. One of the great things about women's history, it drives you to ephemera. It drives you to material culture. It drives you to all the things that you might think, I'm too busy doing the major political papers of George Washington to look at all these weird things. But if you're writing women's history, you got to go there because you might find gold or jewels there. And indeed, that's exactly what I found. And Philip Schuyler, in his papers at the New York Public Library, he just saved every single shipping manifest of every boat, every one of the Hudson River sloops that brought fabric and food and whatnot up to his house in Albany. And there are these long, here's your bill for my ferrying coconuts, Madeira wine, lengths of calico, yellow muslin, all lace, all of this stuff. So you know where the clothes come from, who's wearing what are they doing with their furniture in their drawing room. You can trace all of this stuff. It's all there. It's so fantastic.
Oh, what a treasure trove. So of these many objects that you describe, are any of them still here? Like maybe the wine cooler that Washington gave to
Yes, indeed. And in fact,
Hamilton? You
well,
want to tell about the wine cooler?
the wine cooler. After the scandal of I don't even want to get into the Reynolds scandal. It is too long and involved. But let us say there was a sex scandal Hamilton had been blackmailed by somebody, a woman and her husband, who had set out, it seems, to entrap him. And he was then accused of paying not blackmail money to the husband, which was what was the whole point of this, but of paying money to the husband as part of a deal to, what can I say, a crooked deal in government securities. He was supposed to have had his hand in the government till. And in order to protect himself from this charge and prove that he was not guilty of it, Hamilton determined that he had to cop to the adultery. And when he did this, which he ultimately did after a period of time in which the whole thing was under wraps, he wrote a pamphlet. It was like, Elliot Spitzer giving the press. It was like a press conference. You stand up there and you say, well, I did this terribly. It was just not cool at all. And there was a gigantic uproar. Eliza, who had no idea that this had happened, was so upset. She just had a baby, and literally days postpartum, she left and went upstate with the baby to her parents' house. She came back after she kind of got herself pulled together, but the scandal was still raging. And just at this moment, Washington, who had been Hamilton's boss since the Revolution, when he was a general and Hamilton was an aide-de-camp, Washington sent him a wine cooler that had been one of two that he'd ordered when he first became president. And he sent it to Hamilton with a note that said, not for any intrinsic value that the thing has, but basically, to show you that I still love you and I care for you and you're a great guy. And he sent this to him. And not a word mentioned about the Reynolds scandal, not a word mentioned about anything, but it was clearly Washington saying to him, it's okay, I still believe in you.
And it was a beautiful silver thing that would
Oh, it's
accommodate
gorgeous.
4
Yeah, it
bottles
was
of wine.
a sort of a
and it
silver
still exists.
tureen, and it has 4 things that you can put a bottle into, 4 rings inside of it. You put ice in, and then you put them in. And that the wine cooler is up at Hamilton Grange, and you
All right.
can see
Go see
it
it.
in the dining room.
Okay. So these were really huge families. They had, the women were bearing children year after year after year. And of course, many of them died in infancy or later, maybe with duels, that sort of thing. But I'm wondering if there were many descendants still around. Did you speak with any of them? Was that helpful?
There are many descendants, and I've spoken to a few of them. I was most interested, actually, in speaking to some descendants of Angelicas that I traced. And they led me to a character who I would never have discovered. I might have discovered him, but certainly not in this context, who is this Pierre Toussaint, who was a hairdresser. He was a freed black man in New York. He purchased his own freedom. He was from Haiti originally, and he became a society hairdresser. And he did Angelica's hair, and he did his trademark was to put fresh. He would do your hair with these kind of waves and whatnot, and then he would put fresh flowers in. That was his thing that he did. So and that became his trademark. And I wouldn't have understood, I don't think, his importance if it hadn't been for them. They said, oh, you should look up about Pierre Toussaint, because, well, I did, and then it turned out that Pierre Toussaint not only did Angelica's hair, but he did everybody else's hair in the family, and became like a friend of theirs, and they went and had tea with him. And in fact, Mary Ann Schuyler, who was Philip Schuyler, not the father, Philip the brother Schuyler's wife, was a great friend of his, and their son was Toussaint's heir. Toussaint left money to him. And Toussaint made quite a lot of money, by the way, as a hairdresser, it's fascinating. You know, I would never have found this person had it not been for the Schuyler descendants.
So maybe it's a moment where you can talk a little bit about really the range of attitudes and activism towards or obliviousness to enslavement, and you know that many of the protagonists in your book were owned slaves.
Yeah, they did. They did. And you know, you have to. It's very hard to go and look at a time in history and try to not bring presentist bias to it and say, well, of course, you know, this is wrong. People, they just didn't see it.
Except that some did, as didn't
exactly.
Hamilton, yes.
Well, Hamilton grew to
Grew
this.
to see it.
But when you start this, at the start of this period, you have Dutch,
Right.
New England people. Slavery existed up and down the eastern seaboard. Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, a household with one person in it might have one enslaved person in it. And, you know, I did not know the extent of this when I started this book. Well, I mean, I should have, but I didn't. And what you begin to see, though, and it's partly, I believe, you're starting to see, it's an age of revolution, as I say, people's attitudes begin to change. And Eliza Morton Quincy, who was sister-in-law, actually, of Eliza and Angelica, Eliza Morton Quincy married Josiah Quincy, who became the president of Harvard. And she had been raised in a family in New Jersey with a great deal of money, and they had enslaved people. And as she said, our minds had not been turned to reason on the subject. But as soon as we saw that someone presented this as a conundrum, and we saw that it was wrong. And so what you see, Hamilton, who belonged to the Manumission Society, and unlike some of the other members of the Manumission Society, which was devoted to achieving the, abolition, essentially, or achieving the freedom for enslaved workers, Hamilton had never, so far as I have been able to ascertain, owned an enslaved person. There have been many people who have attempted to show that he did, but those proofs do not stand up to scrutiny. What he did do as the agent of his brother-in-law, Angelica's husband, Angelica and her husband were slaveholders. They had,
even in England.
they took enslaved people to England with them. This did not bother them at all. And when they returned to America in 1797, they wanted Hamilton to purchase for them 2 servants for their household. And he did, because he was their business agent, and that was his job. And it wasn't illegal. It was against his own personal principles to have such people in his employ, but he did it. In Philadelphia, he and Eliza employed an enslaved woman to do housework for them. She was enslaved by a guy who was a neighbor, and when he found out that they had paid her, he garnished the wages because he said, it's mine, I own her. So they paid her again. And, so what you're seeing is this, when Philip Schuyler died, and this is a man who owned, he had 17 enslaved people working in his house in Albany, and probably more on his property in the country, at Saratoga. And in previous land transfers, when he'd given land to his son, he would name the enslaved people that were part of that gift. When he died, and he left very, very detailed will, not one enslaved person is mentioned anywhere in this will. And the day that it was probated, all of his servants on his house in Albany were manumitted, every one of them, except for 2 who were over the age of 55. And according to custom in New York and law in some other places, you couldn't manumit people over the age of 55 because they would have no ways of supporting themselves.
Yeah. Well, you follow all of this very clearly in your book, so thank you for that. I have 2 questions, and then we'll get questions from the audience. One is, before you wrote biographies, you were a top editor, very fine editor.
Thank you.
And I'm
I was
wondering,
an editor.
I'm wondering what this brought into your work in biography. Had you always been interested? Did you publish biography, or?
I did.
Yeah.
I did.
And did this give you a leg up once you started doing it?
Well, I watched it being put together. I saw how the sausage was made, So when it came time for me to make my own sausage, I sort of knew, well, Blanche Cook does it this way, and Larry Bergeron does it this way, and, they all do these different things. The other thing I think probably that made a difference to me as a writer, writing biography, I also edited a lot of fiction. To me, always, as an editor, the thing that mattered the most was the writer's voice. And it wasn't really so much what was in the book, although obviously that mattered, but how it was said meant a huge amount. So that has been always something I wanted to be cognizant of as I wrote. And all the books that I've written, oddly, each one has a slightly different tone of voice. Everybody Was So Young is about people in the lost generation, and it has a kind of a Fitzgerald-y, elegiac tone. And Somewhere is about the New York theater world, and it's very much more jazzy and kind of Tin Pan Alley, and I use a lot of Yiddish in it because there's a lot of people who spoke Yiddish in it. And in Hotel Florida is a much more kind of Hemingway-esque. My son said, "God, Mom, this is such a butch book," when he read it. So, they're all different, and that makes a difference too.
But something compelled you to step out from behind the desk and be the writer. Were you always kind of frustrated that you weren't the writer?
I was never
No?
frustrated. I actually would probably have gone on happily editing books, except that I was, as the English say, made redundant.
Oh, well, we'll leave that aside.
Yes, we will.
You were hardly redundant, in my view. So my last question is, I should know this, but I don't know if you have any sisters.
I don't.
So
I
how
am
did
an
you?
only child. I have no siblings. My husband is one of 4. My mother had a sister. She had an older sister. I was very close to my mother and her sister, and that relationship was very formative for me in terms of thinking I knew what was going on between Eliza and Angelica. My mother had an older sister whom she adored to the point of idolatry. She would have done anything that her sister asked her to do, even when those things were not always things that were helpful or even good for my mother. And there's a kind of selflessness, I don't even want to say selflessness, it's like self-abnegation that happens. And you see this, I think, in that relationship. You have an alpha sister and a beta sister. There are other sisters, there are 5 Schuyler sisters, but the 2 eldest were the closest. They were together, they were bound together by more than just their feelings about Hamilton. And, if Angelica wanted something, she was going to get it. And if Eliza had it, she would give it to her, and she would love her nonetheless.
All the same. Well, are you thinking of your questions out there? And make sure to get the microphone if you want to ask them. Martha?
Thank you both so much for that. So I hope this isn't too heterodox a question for a biographer, but Amanda, did you invent or imagine anything, even in the form of speculative narration? And
No.
I wanted to ask
Are
you just, hold
100
on.
pages, well, 70-something pages of notes in
So
this
then the
book.
follow-up is, in the pages you read, there was dialogue.
Yeah.
Tell us about the
Well-
dialogue in your sources.
The dialogue that I read, there's actually the quotes. Anything that has a quote around it is actually real. And in fact, I will tell you, in this case, all right, wait a minute. Microscopic. Yes. Okay, here are my sources. John Trumbull's autobiography, a letter from Alexander Hamilton to William Short. That was the invitation that said dinner in the country. John C. Hamilton's History of the Republic as told through the life of Alexander Hamilton, volume 7, page 822. Also Trumbull, a William and Mary quarterly article about what was Hamilton's favorite song, and a book called Alexander Hamilton, An Intimate Life, which was written by his grandson, an alienist called Alan McLean Hamilton. So I mean, all these people, the quotes come from there, all the stuff comes from there.
They're recollections of the event. So, yeah. We had a question here. Yeah.
Here. Hi. Thank you both for that, and thank you so much for this beautiful book. I've just started reading it, so I have a while to go. But I guess, and listening to you, just responding to that last question, thinking about your sources, that's been the most striking thing as I've started reading your book, like just the richness of sources. And I was wondering, I was really curious, what would you say your biggest challenge was in terms of navigating through all that different kind of material?
Oh, well, it was actually remembering where I had found that thing that I think your attention span has to be just so hyper. It's like you're on drugs sometimes when you're writing, because you've got to, where did I find that? I've got to tell you that computers are the most fantastic help. I would never have believed how great they are. But I don't think I could have written, well, I have never actually written a book without a computer. And every single piece of my research for this book is digitized. I have books that I read and I wrote in, I put tags in. Those are the really difficult things, because then I have to thumb through pages. What I can do with a computer is that I can search for the thing. Where was that thing where they mentioned a fouling piece? Where is it? And it will pop right up, and out comes the source. The amazing amount of stuff that is digitally available now, and this was a great thing also about working in the founding era, which this was, I had never done this before, but all of those papers, Philip Schuyler's papers, Alexander Hamilton's papers, everybody's papers are digitized, and you can search some of them. If they've been transcribed, and many of them have been transcribed, you can search them online. It is extraordinary. So that's a huge difference. There's also a number of different sources, such as archive.org, for old 18th and 19th century books that you can't get anywhere. I mean, I would have to go to some library that I couldn't possibly find in order to find half the books that I use as source material. But you can find these, you can make yourself a little course pack of excerpts, or you can download the whole book, and then you can search that if you need it. And it's extraordinary. So work in the founding era, people, because the stuff is there.
And I guess we have to thank somebody for doing this. Would it be the Library of Congress? Would it be, I don't know, all sorts of
And I've got to
entities.
tell you, the pandemic, which I thought was going to just sink me, turned out to be, in a weird kind of a way, a blessing, because so many libraries made stuff available remotely, so that, for instance, the New York Public Library there's a gigantic database that the University of Virginia has called Rotunda. It's all the papers of all the founding fathers and lots more people besides. And those, normally I would have had to go to the library and access this database through their network. But they opened it during the pandemic, and now much of it is still available from home, which is extraordinary.
Fabulous.
JSTOR, all these things that I could never have gotten before,
Yeah.
I can get them all now.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And also librarians, some of them were awfully nice to me, and they sent me digitized, just reams of PDFs. And just because I said, I can't get to, Charlottesville, look at your stuff, because, nobody can get there. And they would just go, fine, let's send you this stuff. And they would send it to me. So I have it all.
She has it all.
I have it all.
Gail.
Amanda, I was wondering, is there anything that you were searching for to answer some kind of conundrum that you couldn't find?
Well, it's like childbirth. You don't remember everything. You can't. And I'm just, I'm trying to think if there was, well, I'll tell you one thing. And this is still killing me. When Elizabeth Hamilton was trying to collect Hamilton's papers, she wrote a letter to one of her kids saying, I found the notes that your father made for the oration that General Lee gave at Washington's funeral, first in war, first in peace, first in the hearts of his countrymen. And this is the thing, Lee's, not his entire claim to fame, I mean, he was the father of Robert E. Lee, among other things, but part of his fame rests on the fact that he gave this oration, which was published in all over the place. Nobody has ever said that Hamilton kind of roughed it out for him and said, here's stuff, you say this, okay? With hindsight, I'm thinking, it sounds like him. It really does. I know Hamilton's style, it sounds like him. Eliza would have remembered that it existed because she was there when he was doing it. She did this all the time with him, with the Bank of the United States memorandum that he made for Washington. She sat with him all night while he was writing it, and he's talking to her saying, what do you think this sounds like? And she's saying, well, it sounds good. When he was doing Washington's farewell address, he would read her stuff. When he was making his speech to the Continental Congress, the Constitutional Convention, about the executive branch and what he thought kind of a president should be like. She was there in Philadelphia, which I was able to prove because of one letter that I found in a collection. Amazing. Well, I can't find this document. It doesn't exist anywhere. What there is a notation that was made in the Washington's papers that says, this object has been removed from this collection. It probably belongs in something else. And I suddenly thought, was it there? And did they move it? Where is it? I could go, I don't know, I would have to go to maybe, I don't know where I'd go. Lee's papers and go through all of them one by one in the various places where they might be. I don't know. So that's, that one.
Don't lose sleep over it. I said don't lose sleep over that. No, okay, in the old
Okay,
days,
Deborah.
the biographer's dream was to find a box of unpublished letters in someone's attic. And I think that's probably a less likely occurrence these days. I don't know if there are. still boxes of papers in people's attics. But I'm wondering, do you think there are a lot of undiscovered corners of digitized papers? I think it's fascinating that you made this book from something that was very available, that anybody could have had access to in terms of the material, not in terms of the
Well,
writability.
I'll tell you a story about that.
And are there a lot of hidden subjects for us to find in public archives?
Okay, two things. First of all, there was just parenthetically maybe, there was a trunk of papers that was discovered in the Schuyler Mansion in Albany when it was sold to like the second person who'd bought it after Philip Schuyler's death. And in this trunk were apparently letters between Schuyler and Hamilton, many of which I would have given my eye teeth, and many other people would probably have given their eye teeth for it. But when it was discovered, it was supposed to have been sent to Eliza, and she was waiting for this trunk to arrive. But the son of one of Schuyler's executors saw it, went through the contents, determined that they were too private to show anybody, and burnt all of it. I think I know who this was. Anybody, who reads this book and wants to, email me about it, we can have a conversation. However, here's something that I found, the digitized stuff, that was really, this is the kind of thing you can do with this stuff. I was concerned when Eliza was trying to find Hamilton's papers. She's looking for the notes about the speech that he gave about the executive to the Constitutional Convention, because many people, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, and their buddies, mostly, wanted to prove that Hamilton was a monarchist, and what he really wanted was a king in this country, and that's what this speech was all about. And she knew that was not what that speech was, because she'd been with him when he was concocting it, and was with him for dinner the night afterwards, and everybody's congratulating him on such a great speech, which they would hardly have done, I think, had he said, "Oh, we really need a king here." So I thought to myself, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to call up all the Madison papers. I'm going to call up all the Jefferson papers on Rotunda, and I'm going to call up, I think I did Monroe as well, just for good measure. And I searched for, after a certain date, Mrs. Hamilton. And what do you suppose I found? I found all of these gentlemen saying, "Mrs. Hamilton wants these papers. I told her I don't have them. You tell her the same thing." They're playing monkey in the middle with her. I mean, what schmucks? Really. So, just saying, that's what you can find. You can find stuff like that.
Yeah. More questions? One more we have? Oh, great.
It's an indecent question for any biographer.
Yeah.
But having immersed yourself in the period, where to? How about Morris? Governor Morris.
Oh.
And there isn't a decent biography.
Oh, I
of
love
him.
him so much. There was actually a quite lovely biography written in the 60s, I think.
Yeah,
but it doesn't have access to his full papers, and so which is a tragedy. He's such a wonderful character. I don't know that I have the sitzfleisch to do this, but God, he's great. I mean,
he kept coming up in all the sort of fun places. And
and he's a great character. And he and Hamilton wrote the Constitution, literally wrote it, the two of them.
Yeah.
And I mean,
He should get more credit.
there's definitely
Yes.
And Morris had a wonderful life. I mean, anybody, I can't get into it. It's too long and too fascinating, but yes, absolutely.
To it. Well, thank you, Amanda, and well, that will be our last question. I want to thank Shelby White and the Leon Levy Foundation for their generous support. I also want to say I'll be back December 4th to talk about afterlives after Thanksgiving, if you want to come back. With
I'm coming
Martha
back.
Hodes
Who's with
as
me?
interlocutor. So, thank you.